Jake had always been a man of few words and fewer friends. The dusty trails of Arizona territory knew his boots well, and the saloons knew his silence even better. He was 32 years old, weather-beaten like old leather, with hands that knew the weight of a Colt .45 and eyes that had seen too much death under the desert sun. The morning everything changed started like any other. Jake was riding his black stallion, Midnight, through the rocky canyons east of Tucson. The year was 1887, and the Apache Wars were supposedly over, but Jake knew better. The desert never truly slept, and neither did old grudges. He had been tracking a group of cattle rustlers for 3 days when he heard the screaming. It cut through the morning air like a knife through butter, high-pitched and desperate. Jake pulled hard on Midnight's reins, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. The sound was coming from behind a cluster of red rocks about half a mile ahead. As he approached carefully, staying low in the saddle, Jake could see smoke rising from what looked like a small Apache camp. The screaming had stopped, replaced by men's rough laughter and the sound of horses stamping nervously. Jake dismounted and crept closer, using the rocks as cover. What he saw made his blood run cold. 5 white men, clearly outlaws by their appearance, had attacked a small group of Apache people. 2 elderly Apache men lay motionless on the ground, their blood soaking into the red earth. A middle-aged Apache woman was kneeling beside them, her face streaked with tears and dirt. But it was the 3 young Apache women that held Jake's attention. They couldn't have been more than 16 or 17 years old, and they were bound with rope, sitting in a line near a dying campfire. Their dark eyes blazed with defiance despite their situation. The outlaws were dividing up the camp's meager possessions and arguing about what to do with their captives. "We could sell them in Mexico," one of the outlaws was saying. He was a large man with a thick beard and clothes that hadn't seen soap in months. "Apache girls fetch good money down south." "Too much trouble," replied another, spitting tobacco juice into the dirt. "Easier to just leave 'em here. They'll die soon enough without their folks." Jake felt his jaw clench. He had no love for the Apache people. He'd lost friends to their raids in years past. But this wasn't war anymore. This was just murder and cruelty, and Jake had his own code about such things. The third outlaw, a thin man with a scar across his cheek, was examining something in his hands. "Look at these," he said, holding up what appeared to be small leather pouches. Each of these girls was wearing one of these medicine bags, probably worth something to the right collector. Jake could see the small, decorated pouches from his hiding spot. They were beautiful pieces of Apache craftsmanship, each one unique and clearly important to the girls who wore them. The outlaws were treating them like mere trinkets. "Just leave 'em," the bearded leader said. "We got enough to carry already." That's when Jake made his decision. He couldn't take on 5 armed men in a straight fight, but he'd been dealing with outlaws and hostile situations his entire adult life. He had a plan, though it was dangerous and probably stupid. Jake quietly made his way back to Midnight and rode in a wide circle around the camp. He positioned himself on a ridge overlooking the scene, where he had a clear view and good shooting angles. Then he began to make noise. "Riders coming," he shouted at the top of his lungs, making his voice echo off the canyon walls. "Whole cavalry patrol, they got us surrounded." The outlaws immediately panicked, grabbing their weapons and looking around frantically. Jake fired his rifle into the air several times, then quickly moved to another position and fired again, making it sound like multiple shooters. "There's too many of 'em," he yelled from his new position. "We gotta get out of here." The outlaws, thinking they were about to be overwhelmed by soldiers, quickly gathered their horses and fled the camp, leaving behind the Apache woman and the 3 bound girls. They were so frightened that they didn't even think to take their captives with them. Jake waited several minutes to make sure the outlaws were really gone before approaching the camp. The Apache woman looked up at him with suspicious eyes as he rode in. She spoke rapidly in Apache, which Jake didn't understand, but her tone was clearly questioning. "Easy there," Jake said, dismounting slowly with his hands visible. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." He approached the 3 bound girls carefully. They watched him with the same defiant eyes he'd noticed earlier, but he could see fear there too. Jake pulled out his knife and began cutting their ropes. "You speak English?" he asked the oldest-looking girl. She nodded slowly. "Some," she replied in a voice barely above a whisper. "Good, those men who hurt your people, they're gone now, but they might come back with more friends." Jake finished freeing the girls and stepped back. "You need to get out of here." The Apache woman spoke to the girls in their own language, her voice urgent. The oldest girl translated for Jake. "She says the men killed her husband and brother. She thanks you for helping us, but she asks why you did it." Jake considered the question. Why had he risked his life for people who were supposed to be his enemies? He wasn't sure he had a good answer. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. The girl translated this, and the woman nodded slowly. She said something else, and the girl looked surprised. "What did she say?" Jake asked. "She says the spirits told her this morning that help would come from an unexpected place. She says you were sent to us." Jake felt uncomfortable with that kind of talk. "Look, miss, I don't know about spirits and such. I just know you folks need to get somewhere safe. Where's your tribe?" "2 days north," the girl replied. "But grandmother is hurt. She cannot walk far." Jake looked at the older woman more closely and saw that she was favoring one leg. The outlaws must have injured her during the attack. "I'll help you get there," Jake heard himself saying, surprising himself even as the words came out. "I've got supplies and I know this country pretty well." The girl's eyes widened. "You would do this for Apache?" "I would do it for people in trouble," Jake replied. "Doesn't matter what tribe they are." As the Apache woman struggled to stand, something fell from her dress, one of the decorated leather pouches the outlaws had been examining. Jake bent to pick it up, and as his fingers touched the soft leather, something strange happened. For just a moment, Jake felt different. The desert around him seemed more alive, more connected to everything else. He could sense things he'd never noticed before: the flow of water underground, the movement of animals in the distance, the very heartbeat of the land itself. The feeling passed quickly, leaving Jake confused and shaken. He handed the pouch back to the woman, who looked at him with new interest. She spoke to the oldest girl again, longer this time and with obvious urgency. The girl listened intently, then turned to Jake with an expression of wonder. "Grandmother says something has happened to you. She says you touched her medicine bag and felt the desert's power. She wants to know if this is true." Jake shifted uncomfortably. "I felt something, I guess, probably just the sun getting to me." But the woman was already speaking again, and now all 3 girls were looking at Jake with the same amazed expression. "What's she saying now?" Jake asked. "She says the medicine bags choose their own bearers. She says when her husband and brother died, their bags lost their power and became just leather and beads. But when you touched hers, she felt the power flow into you instead." "That's impossible," Jake said. "I'm not Apache. I don't believe in any of that medicine bag business." The oldest girl smiled for the first time since Jake had met her. "The spirits do not ask what you believe, cowboy. They only ask what you will do with the gift they give you." Jake helped the injured woman onto Midnight, then began leading the group north toward the Apache settlement. But as they walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just changed in ways he couldn't understand. Behind them, the 3 small leather pouches that had belonged to the dead men began to glow softly in the afternoon sun, though no one was there to see it. The desert wind carried their power forward, following the strange group making their way across the harsh landscape. And somewhere in the distance, the 5 outlaws who had fled were regrouping, angry and embarrassed. They had left valuable captives behind, and their leader was not the type of man who forgot such losses easily. The sun began its descent toward the western horizon, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Jake walked beside his horse, leading a group of Apache people to safety, unaware that he now carried the spiritual weight of 3 sacred medicine bags and the responsibility that came with them. The first day of his new life was drawing to a close, and tomorrow would bring challenges that would test everything he thought he knew about himself and the world around him. The night brought strange dreams to Jake. He saw visions of eagles soaring over endless desert, of ancient ceremonies around sacred fires, and of 3 young Apache warriors who looked remarkably like the girls he was helping. But these weren't the girls. These were men from long ago, and they were trying to tell him something important. Jake woke before dawn, his head pounding and his mouth dry as dust. The Apache woman whose name he had learned was already awake, tending a small fire. The 3 girls, Senna, and were still sleeping nearby. "Bad dreams?" asked in careful English. Jake nodded, surprised that she could speak his language. "You didn't mention you knew English." "I know many things I do not always share," she replied with a slight smile. The dreams will get stronger before they get weaker. The medicine bags are trying to teach you. I keep telling you I don't believe in that stuff, Jake muttered, but even as he said it, he could feel the truth was more complicated. Something was definitely happening to him, whether he believed in it or not. They broke camp as soon as the girls woke up and continued their journey north. Jake had estimated it would take 2 full days to reach the Apache settlement, but's injured leg was slowing them down more than he had expected. Around midday, as they were crossing a particularly exposed stretch of desert, Jake's new senses began tingling with warning. He held up his hand for the group to stop. "What is it?" asked. She was the oldest of the 3 girls and had become their unofficial spokesperson. "Someone's following us," Jake replied, scanning the horizon behind them. "Been tracking us since we broke camp this morning." Sure enough, about an hour later, the 5 outlaws from the previous day appeared on the ridge behind them. They were too far away to pose an immediate threat, but Jake could see they were well armed and mounted on fresh horses. "They want us back," Senna said, her voice tight with fear. She was the middle sister, quieter but with sharp, observant eyes. "They want revenge," Jake corrected. "I made them look like fools yesterday, and men like that don't forget." The youngest of the 3 moved closer to Jake. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her words carried surprising wisdom. "Grandmother says you must use the power now. The bags will protect us if you let them." Jake looked down at who was sitting on a rock and massaging her injured leg. What exactly is she talking about? Reached into her dress and pulled out her medicine bag, then gestured for the 3 girls to do the same. To Jake's surprise, each girl produced a similar bag from somewhere in their clothing. "I thought the outlaws took those," Jake said. "They took the men's bags," explained. "These are ours. We hid them when the attack started." Spoke to the girls in Apache, then turned to Jake. "My husband's bag, my brother's bag, and the bag that belonged to our war chief who died last winter. Their power came to you yesterday when you touched mine. But to use that power, you must accept it fully." "Accept what exactly?" "The responsibility to protect what they protected, to be guardian to those who cannot guard themselves." Jake looked back at the approaching riders. They were definitely getting closer. "And if I don't?" "Then we die," said simply, "and the spirits will find another guardian." The outlaws were now close enough that Jake could make out individual faces. The bearded leader was in front, and Jake could see the anger in his posture even from a distance. "Fine," Jake said, surprising himself again. "I'll claim them, but I still don't understand what I'm supposed to do." The moment he spoke those words, "I'll claim them," something extraordinary happened. Jake felt a surge of power unlike anything he had ever experienced. It was as if the desert itself was flowing through his veins, giving him strength and knowledge and connection to everything around him. His vision became incredibly sharp. He could see individual details on the faces of the men riding toward them. He could sense the presence of every living thing within miles. Most importantly, he could feel the intentions of the approaching outlaws, and those intentions were definitely murderous. "Now what?" he asked. "Now you protect," she replied, "the way they would have protected." Jake found himself moving with confidence he didn't understand. He helped, and the girls take cover behind a cluster of large rocks, then positioned himself where he had a clear view of the approaching threat. The outlaws were now close enough to shout. "Hey there, mister," the bearded leader called out. "We've come for our property." "Don't see any property here," Jake called back. "Just people traveling." "Those Apache girls belong to us by right of conquest," the leader replied. "We fought for 'em fair and square." "Funny thing about that," Jake said, his voice carrying further than it should have been able to. "I saw your fight yesterday. Didn't look very fair to me, more like murder and kidnapping." The outlaws had stopped about 50 yards away, spreading out in a rough line. They were clearly planning to surround Jake's position. "You cost us a lot of money yesterday, friend," the leader said. "We're gonna give you one chance to walk away. Leave the women and ride out. No harm will come to you." Jake could feel the power of the medicine bags flowing through him, and with it came knowledge. He knew exactly where each outlaw was positioned, even the ones trying to circle around behind the rocks. He knew which one would draw first, and from which direction the attack would come. "Counteroffer," Jake called out. "You ride out now, and I won't have to kill all 5 of you." The outlaws laughed at this. 5 against 1 seemed like good odds to them. What they didn't know was that Jake was no longer fighting alone. The bearded leader made a gesture, and all 5 men drew their weapons simultaneously. But Jake was already moving, guided by instincts and knowledge that belonged to 3 generations of Apache warriors. He rolled behind cover just as the first shots rang out, then came up firing from a completely different position. His first shot took down the man with the scar, who had been trying to flank them from the left. The second shot hit the leader's horse, sending the man tumbling to the ground. Jake's third shot wounded another outlaw in the shoulder, spinning him around and knocking him out of his saddle. But the most amazing thing wasn't Jake's shooting. It was the way the desert itself seemed to be helping him. Dust clouds rose up at exactly the right moments to blind his enemies. Small rock slides occurred just when the outlaws needed their footing most. Even the wind seemed to be blowing their shots off target while guiding Jake's bullets true. The surviving outlaws, suddenly realizing they were facing something beyond their understanding, tried to retreat. But Jake found himself moving with impossible speed and grace, using the landscape like he had been born to it. Within 10 minutes it was over. 2 of the outlaws were dead, 2 were wounded and unconscious, and the leader was sitting on the ground with his hands in the air, looking terrified. "What are you?" the leader gasped. "You ain't human." "I'm human enough," Jake replied, though he wasn't entirely sure that was still true. "But I'm under the protection of powers you wouldn't understand." He approached the surviving outlaws carefully, keeping his weapon ready. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to take your wounded friends and ride out of here. You're never going to bother Apache people again. And if I ever see any of you within 100 miles of this territory, I'll finish what we started today." The bearded leader nodded frantically. Yes, sir, we understand." As the surviving outlaws gathered their wounded and prepared to leave, their leader turned back to Jake. "Mister, I've been in fights with Indians before, but I never seen anything like what just happened here. You got some kind of Apache magic working for you." "Maybe I do," Jake replied. "And maybe you should remember that before you think about hurting innocent people again." After the outlaws had disappeared into the distance, Jake returned to where and the girls were waiting. They looked at him with a mixture of awe and satisfaction. "You did well," said. "The spirits of our guardians are pleased." Jake looked down at his hands, which were still steady despite everything that had happened. "I felt like I wasn't even controlling what I was doing, like something else was guiding me." "Something was," said. 3 somethings, the spirits of the warriors whose power you now carry." "Does this mean I'm Apache now?" Jake asked, only half joking. Smiled. "You are what you have always been, a good man who protects those who need protection. But now you have the tools to do it better." They resumed their journey north, but now Jake felt different about everything. The desert no longer seemed harsh and empty to him. Instead, he could sense the life and connections that flowed through every part of it. He understood now why the Apache people fought so hard to protect this land. It wasn't just territory to them, it was a living thing that they were part of. As they walked, fell into step beside him. "The power will grow stronger," she told him, "but it will also ask more of you." "What do you mean?" "There are others who need protection. Not just Apache people, but anyone who cannot protect themselves. The spirits will guide you to them." Jake considered this. His life as a wandering cowboy suddenly seemed very far away. What if I don't want that responsibility? "Then the power will leave you and find someone else," replied. "But I do not think it will leave. I think you have been looking for something to protect your whole life, and now you have found it." That evening, as they made camp in a sheltered canyon, Jake sat apart from the others and tried to understand what had happened to him. He had always been a good shot and a capable fighter, but what he had done that day was beyond anything he had ever imagined possible. As he pondered this, he heard footsteps behind him. It was carrying something in her hands. "Grandmother asked me to give you this," she said, holding out a small leather pouch decorated with beads and feathers. "Another medicine bag?" Jake asked. "This one is yours," replied. "Made from the sacred items of the 3 warriors whose spirits now guide you. As long as you carry it, you will have access to their knowledge and strength." Jake took the bag and immediately felt the same surge of connection to the desert that he had experienced earlier. But this time, along with the power came flashes of memory, not his own memories, but those of the Apache warriors whose spirits now shared his burden. He saw glimpses of their lives, battles fought to protect their people, moments of quiet wisdom shared around campfires, the deep spiritual connection they had felt to the land and all living things. And he saw their deaths. Each had died protecting others, giving their lives so that their families and tribes might survive. "They chose well," said softly. "You have the same heart they had." Jake tied the medicine bag to his belt, feeling its weight like a comfortable burden. "What happens when we reach your settlement?" "Grandmother will tell the council what has happened. They will want to meet you to understand what the spirits have done. But after that, the choice will be yours. You can stay with us, or you can continue your journey. And the power will go with you wherever you go, but it will draw you toward those who need protection, like iron draws iron." That night, Jake's dreams were different. Instead of confusing visions, he had clear conversations with 3 Apache warriors who spoke to him in English, though he somehow knew they had never learned the language in life. They told him about the history of their people, about the sacred places in the desert that must be protected, and about the dark forces that were gathering to threaten not just the Apache, but all the peaceful people of the territory. When he woke the next morning, Jake knew that his old life was truly over. Whatever lay ahead, he would face it as something new, a guardian carrying the spiritual power of 3 Apache warriors, bound by their oaths to protect the innocent and preserve the sacred balance of the desert. The sun rose on their final day of travel, and in the distance, Jake could see smoke rising from cooking fires. The Apache settlement was close now, and with it, the next chapter of his transformed life. The Apache settlement lay nestled in a valley between red sandstone cliffs, hidden from casual view but strategically positioned to see anyone approaching from miles away. As Jake led and the 3 girls down the winding path into the valley, he could feel dozens of eyes watching him. Word of their arrival had obviously preceded them. Apache scouts had been tracking their approach since dawn, and Jake could sense their presence even though he couldn't see them. His new abilities made him aware of things that would have been invisible to him just days earlier. The settlement itself was larger than Jake had expected, perhaps 60 people living in traditional Apache wickiups mixed with a few more permanent adobe structures. Children stopped playing to stare at the strange procession, while adults emerged from their homes to see what was happening. An elderly Apache man approached them as they reached the center of the settlement. He was tall and dignified, with silver hair braided down his back and clothing that marked him as someone of importance. Behind him walked several other tribal leaders, their expressions curious but wary. Spoke rapidly in Apache, gesturing toward Jake as she told their story. Jake caught a few words that sounded familiar, but mostly he just waited and tried not to look threatening. The elderly man listened to his account, then studied Jake with sharp, intelligent eyes. When finished speaking, there was a long moment of silence. Finally, the man spoke in careful English. "I am Chief. Tells me that you carry the spirits of our fallen warriors and that you use their power to protect our people. This is a serious claim." "I'm not sure I understand it all myself," Jake replied honestly. "I just know that something happened when I touched that medicine bag, and now I can do things I never could before." Chief nodded slowly. "The spirits do not make mistakes in their choices. If they have come to you, there is good reason." He gestured toward a large wickiup at the center of the settlement. "Come, the council must hear this story." The council meeting lasted most of the afternoon. Jake found himself sitting in a circle with 12 Apache elders, telling and retelling his story while they asked detailed questions through an interpreter. Several times, they asked him to demonstrate his new abilities, and Jake found he could do things that amazed even him: track animals by sensing their life force, predict weather changes by feeling shifts in the desert's energy, and most remarkably, communicate with the spirits of the 3 warriors who now guided him. During one such demonstration, Jake fell into a trance-like state where the warriors' spirits spoke directly through him. They told the council about the growing threat to all the peaceful tribes of the region, a group of wealthy white men who were planning to drive out all Native Americans so they could claim the land for mining operations. When Jake came out of the trance, the council members were speaking urgently among themselves in Apache. Chief turned to him with a grave expression. "The spirits have revealed something we suspected but could not prove. There is indeed a conspiracy against our people, and it reaches high into the territorial government. You have been chosen to help us fight this threat." I don't understand, Jake said. I'm just one man, how can I fight something that big? You are not just one man anymore, replied an elderly woman council member. You carry the accumulated wisdom and power of our greatest protectors, and you can move in the white man's world without suspicion in ways we cannot. That evening, as the council continued their discussions, Jake sat by a fire with Senna, and the three young women had become his unofficial guides to understanding his new role, and he found their perspectives both practical and profound. Are you going to stay with us? Senna asked. She had warmed up to Jake considerably since their journey began. I don't think that's my path, Jake replied. The spirits are already pulling me toward something else, I can feel it. What do you feel? Asked. Jake closed his eyes and let his new senses expand. Immediately, he began to pick up distress signals from various directions: people in trouble, innocents facing danger, sacred places under threat. There's a wagon train about 30 miles south, he said slowly. Families with children, they're lost, and there are men following them with bad intentions. That's tomorrow's work, said with a smile. Tonight we celebrate your transformation. The celebration was unlike anything Jake had ever experienced. The entire tribe gathered around a large fire while Apache musicians played traditional songs and dancers performed ancient ceremonies. Jake found himself understanding the meaning of the rituals without needing translation. The spirits within him provided knowledge of Apache culture and customs. During the ceremony, Chief presented Jake with additional gifts: a horse trained by Apache warriors, weapons blessed by the tribe's medicine men, and most importantly, a new name in the Apache language: Protector who walks between worlds. This name reflects your unique position, the chief explained. You are not Apache, but you carry Apache spirits. You are not bound to our tribe, but you are bound to our cause of protecting the innocent and preserving the sacred balance. As the celebration continued, Jake noticed that had been watching him with particular interest all evening. Eventually, she approached him. There is something else you must know about your transformation, she said. The three spirits that guide you, they were not chosen randomly. What do you mean? One was my husband, one was my brother. The third was Elon, who was to marry my granddaughter when he returned from his last raid. Jake looked over at who was dancing with the other young women. She was engaged. The spirits of our men chose you because they knew you would protect us as they would have protected us. In a sense, you are now the guardian they cannot be. This revelation hit Jake harder than he expected. He wasn't just carrying abstract spiritual power. He was carrying the very specific love and protective instincts of men who had died defending their families. That's a heavy responsibility, he said. The heaviest, agreed, but also the most sacred. Later that night, after the celebration had wound down, Jake found himself unable to sleep. He walked to the edge of the settlement and looked out over the desert, his enhanced senses taking in the vast network of life and energy that flowed through the landscape. Joined him there, moving silently, as all Apache people seemed able to do. Having second thoughts, she asked. Just trying to understand what my life is going to be like now, Jake replied. I was a simple cowboy 3 days ago. Now I'm some kind of spiritual guardian carrying the souls of dead warriors. Elon was worried about the same things when he received his calling, said quietly. He didn't feel worthy of the power he was given. Yes, he was chosen as a guardian spirit when he was about your age. The responsibility frightened him at first, but he grew into it. He became the most respected protector our people had. I'm sorry for your loss. Was quiet for a long moment. In our beliefs, death is not an ending. It is a transformation. Elon continues his work of protection through you now. In a way, our engagement continues as well. Jake wasn't sure how to respond to that. The spiritual and emotional connections he had inherited were more complex than he had realized. What does that mean for me? He asked. It means you will never be alone in your work. And it means that when you protect others, you do so with the love and commitment of 3 men who died for their families. The next morning, Jake prepared to leave the settlement. His new spiritual senses were pulling him strongly toward the south, where the wagon train was struggling through the desert. But leaving proved more difficult than he had expected. The entire tribe gathered to see him off, and many of the younger warriors expressed their desire to ride with him. Chief had to remind them that Jake's calling was to work alone, moving between the Apache and white worlds in ways that others could not. Gave him final instructions about caring for his medicine bag and maintaining his connection to the spirits. The three girls each blessed his weapons with their own protective charms. But it was who provided the most important guidance. "Remember that the power you carry is not just for fighting," she told him. "It is for healing, for bringing people together, for protecting sacred places and sacred ways. The greatest strength of a guardian is knowing when not to use force. And the spirits will guide me in this. They will try, but ultimately the choices you make are your own. The spirits chose you because they trusted your heart." As Jake rode out of the valley on his new horse, a magnificent spotted stallion he had named Spirit, he carried with him not just supernatural abilities, but the love and hopes of an entire community. His first test came sooner than expected. The wagon train he had sensed was indeed in trouble, but the situation was more complex than simple bandits and lost travelers. A group of territorial officials were systematically harassing pioneer families, confiscating their supplies and forcing them to pay illegal taxes for passage through what they claimed was government land. Using his new abilities, Jake was able to gather evidence of the corruption while protecting the families from further harassment. When he confronted the corrupt officials, they found themselves facing a man who seemed to anticipate their every move and who possessed an authority that went beyond anything they could understand. By the end of the encounter, the families were safe. The corrupt officials were fleeing back to Tucson with their illegal enterprise exposed, and Jake had discovered something important about his new role. He wasn't just meant to protect Apache people, but all innocent people who faced injustice. Over the following months, Jake traveled throughout the Arizona territory, following the guidance of his spiritual companions. He helped Mexican families defend their land from claimed jumpers, protected Chinese workers from racist violence, and even assisted cavalry units in tracking down genuine outlaws who threatened all communities regardless of race. But he always returned to check on the Apache settlement, bringing news of the outside world and receiving updates on the larger conspiracy that threatened Native American communities throughout the region. The power of the three medicine bags continued to grow within him, and with it, his understanding of his role as a protector who walked between worlds. He was no longer Jake the cowboy. He was something new, something that had never existed before in the long history of the American frontier. He was a guardian carrying the souls of Apache warriors, sworn to protect the innocent and preserve the sacred balance between all peoples who shared the harsh but beautiful land of the desert Southwest. And as he rode across the vast landscape under the endless sky, Jake knew that his real adventures were just beginning. The spirits had chosen him for a reason, and that reason would unfold over many years of service to those who needed protection most. The three medicine bags at his side glowed softly in the desert sun, a constant reminder of the love and sacrifice that empowered his mission. Fine, he had claimed them, and they had claimed him in return. And together, they would ensure that justice and protection would always be available to those who needed it most, no matter what dangers lay ahead in the untamed territory they all called home.